The concept of free will is clearly essential to most mainstream religious belief. There's no question about that. With religion, though, you have this added complication of a created deity, especially when you grant that created deity certain properties like omniscience and omnipotence. And this is the problem that Augustine tackled. This is the problem that Calvin tackled. They struggled with these things. And they came to the conclusion, rightfully so I think, that there cannot be a concept of free will if you truly believe that God has sovereign authority. That can't be consistent.
Theologians have been fighting for millennia about free will. Martin Luther, for example, he wrote a book called The Bondage of the Will, contradicting Erasmus about free will, in which he says, no, we don't have free will at all. But Aquinas and others would say, we in fact do have free will. So you don't have to be an expert to notice that all the experts disagree with each other about free will.
There's a very rich Calvinist tradition, for example, that tries to reconcile the notion of God's foreknowledge with the belief in free will, and saw that there seems to be a problem. If God knows everything that's going to happen from the beginning of time to the end of time, how is it that individuals could be free? And so the Calvinists reasoned that it's better to just give up the belief in free will and maintain the belief in God's foreknowledge. Other sects of Christianity have tried to reconcile them in various ways, but it gets harder and harder to do over time.
And many people get around this by saying things like, well, look, I mean, God knows what you're going to do, but he doesn't control what you're going to do. Okay, maybe that's a way to get around things, but think about what you're saying. Again, any argument that can be used for or against free will in a religious context could also apply in a secular context. Imagine, for instance, that we were to scan your brain and predict every single action that you're about to make. Now, we're not the ones making you do that. We just know what you're going to do. Would you consider yourself free? I certainly wouldn't. Because the fact that God knows what you're going to do means that you have to do that thing. And sure, that may be your choice, so to speak. You may be able to choose that action. But if you have to do what God knew you were going to do, then that choice is a choice not worthy of the name.
This particular issue is one of the paradoxes of free will. Because if God knows everything and knows the future and knows what you're going to do, how could you possibly be free? My personal view on this is that, and this actually is backed up by certain, highly respected Jewish thinkers, is that God does not know what we're going to freely choose until we choose it. But the instant we make a choice, he knows what it is, and he instantly knows how to orchestrate things after that, down here on earth, in the physical world. So, in order to give us free will, God had to choose to make a sacrifice himself, to actually contract himself in a certain way, to give us space to be able to choose freely, without his intervention, without him affecting our choices at all.
There's a second dilemma that we could introduce here, and it could be raised by the question, can there be free will in heaven? So think about this. If there's free will in heaven, well then, according to the free will reply to the problem of evil, there must be evil in heaven. Because the free will reply maintains that God created the best of all possible worlds, the best of all possible worlds being one where agents possess free will. But it's also stated in the free will reply that it's logically impossible for God to create free creatures such that they don't have the capacity to do evil. So that by giving agents free will, it's by necessity possible that you might end up with a Hitler. So if agents have free will in heaven, then there must be evil in heaven, because you just said, the theists just said, that it's logically impossible for agents to have free will where they're not capable of committing evil acts. But if there's not free will in heaven, well then it seems that this world is more preferable to heaven, because you just said God created the best of all possible worlds, and it's better to have a world with free will than a world without. So you end up with a dilemma of sorts. Either this world is more preferable to heaven, in which case heaven isn't a very desirable place, or heaven is a place where free will exists, in which case evil must also exist. Now, if you were to say, okay, well, there can be free will in heaven, but no one exercises it such that they choose to do evil acts, that's an option. But that would mean the bar to enter heaven would have to be moral perfection. And none of us are morally perfect beings. It'd be a place occupied by one, God.
Well, the Jewish perspective is that free will no longer exists after you die. Okay? So we can't exercise our free will anymore after we die. Free will is only possible when we're alive.
If you go back, this whole idea of the eternal, irrevocable hell, I'm not really sure when that arose, but the idea of hell actually comes from the Zoroastrians. The Jews did not have originally a hell idea. They only had this idea of a conscious afterlife after being affected by the Persians who were dominating them for a while. And the Persians had brought this Zoroastrian belief, which had this idea of heaven and hell and all of this. But the Zoroastrian idea originally was hell would burn away evil people. So if you were completely evil, you would just be destroyed. That you wouldn't be burning forever in hell, you would just be gone. And people who were only partially evil, they would burn until all their evil stuff was burned away, and then they would get to go to heaven, right? Or they would be resurrected or allowed to live in the future life.
The thing is, hell and heaven can't be justified even if there is free will. Even in a world where there is free will, and even where you are really morally responsible for your actions, your punishment should always be proportional to the crime. And if hell is eternal, if hell is infinite, then the crime, the immorality has to be infinite. And that can't be a thing. Now, don't get me wrong, if somebody murders my family, you have this emotional reaction. You want that person to suffer for eternity. But in a sense, that would be awful. That would be immoral in itself. Because although that person's done something unthinkable, they haven't done something infinite. And so you can't justify the infinite nature, the infinite character of hell. Now, if hell and heaven can't be justified when there is free will, then there's absolutely no way that it can be justified when there isn't.
Once you move away from the conception of contra causa free will, then it turns out that God sending you to heaven or to hell really is the result of a horrible monster decision-making process, and got nothing to do with justice or with just retribution and things like that. So I think it would be, in fact, a major issue.